Okay, I think we have a question. Let's see, Alessandra, do we have a question?
Okay, so in this sentence, quote, if we include science under philosophy, comma, there is commonly held to be some sort of border warfare. I don't understand what how to be means in that sentence. Thank you very much.
All right, we have a question here. Okay. There is a sentence. The sentence says, if we include science under philosophy, there is commonly held to be some sort of border warfare. There is commonly held to be. The student doesn't understand that phrase, held to be. So, if we include science under philosophy, comma, there is commonly held to be some sort of border warfare. If something is held, it means they understand it, they accept and agree that this is so. Commonly means many people, most people hold the viewpoint that. Okay, so there is commonly held to be some sort of border warfare means some sort of border warfare exists, people think. So there is commonly held to be means many people think that what follows is true. Is that clear? Okay. If there are any other questions, go ahead and send them in. I had a little news article that I came across today that I wanted to share with you about homeschooling. Somehow it seemed to me to represent the kind of thinking that we see in the culture that we are trying to combat. Thinking that is not logical and grounded. So it's about homeschooling. In a letter to the editor of a newspaper, the Reverend Dennis Smith, so this is a pastor, called for the elimination of homeschooling unless it is regulated by the state to the same extent as public schools. He required that, he asked for that, because he saw another letter to the editor of the same newspaper by a homeschool young adult. That homeschool young adult wrote a letter to the editor expressing the opinion that stem cell research, embryonic stem cell research, ought to be banned because it has proved unproductive and because it involves the killing of human embryos. Reverend Dennis Smith was appalled by this letter and said that homeschooling is a smokescreen for child abuse. Smokescreen. A smokescreen for child abuse. That means it is a false front. We say we are homeschooling, but really we are abusing our children. And that it is not possible for a child to get an education. Let's see. An actual education. A child cannot get an actual if they are being religiously indoctrinated at home. And so he says the religious Bible-centered education by parents is preventing children from getting an actual education. This because a homeschooled teenager wrote a letter to the editor which was published expressing a valid scientific and moral opinion which is held by many conservatives who are well qualified. So obviously this young person is civically involved, writing letters to the editor, and well educated. The rest of the article talks about statistics of homeschoolers who have been studied and shown to have higher standardized test scores by far than any other group of children being taught in the United States. But it occurred to me that this religious pastor was struck by a well-written ideological letter, and he called for abolishment of homeschooling because he said the child is not having an actual education if he does not agree with the common view of the society. So, we are not supposed to think for ourselves, we are supposed to agree with experts. And to me, that is what Olavo is fighting. That is what Levis is fighting. The idea that the experts set the agenda and all ordinary people, their perceptions are not valid. So we will talk more about that today in our reading. Let's see where we are. I believe we're on page 32. Okay, yes. If you have no questions, we will go on to page 32 of our book. Now let us look back a little bit to the extended quote from Marjorie Greene's book, The Knower and the Known. In that quote, Marjorie Greene, I think I will read it to you. We won't study the whole thing, but it doesn't hurt to hear the fluent reading of the quote. So I'll read through it at full speed. Okay, I'm going to begin with the words, "She makes it plain," which is the beginning of the paragraph. And then we will review key concepts that shoot us into the study for today. She makes it plain that Russell's attempt to produce statements of fact while avoiding words by which substances, rather than direct and particular percepts, would be suggested, is absurd. Quote, "But can any names, such as the general quality words red, feline, colored, etc., of which he is trying to build his firmly factual language, work uniquely for this percept? Both the words themselves and the things designated are instances of universals. The same word, for example, cat, designates the same thing, a cat, in the sense that a mark or sound of that same class designates a thing of that same class. But no occasion of cat or cat is identical with any other. It is in each case a similar occurrence or object. How do I know that it is similar, and similar enough to be subsumed under the same class? By memory, a Humean empiricist would say. But even granting that, meeting cat 2, I recall cat 1, I must make the comparison. I must liken cat 2 to cat 1 and find them similar by a standard which is the concept cat. I do need a pencil, Alexandro. If you could find one somehow, because I can't write in the book with a pen. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. I want to take some notes while reading. Okay. I must liken cat number 2 to cat number 1 and find them similar by a standard which is the concept cat. I do not mean to suggest that there is an explicit or even unconscious inference involved here. Every time I recognize a cat as a cat. But as my world is colored, so too it is cat inhabited. Thank you. Okay, just a second. Standard. Concept cat. Every time I recognize a cat, I do not mean to suggest that there is an explicit or even an unconscious inference involved here every time I recognize a cat as a cat. But my world is colored, so too it is cat inhabited, and at the same time structured through language. I dwell in a coherent and mutually interacting framework of word classes and thing classes. Only within such a frame do individual sounds or written shapes and individual animals become what they are. The power to generalize which speech demands is the power to sort out according to effective norms, both utterances and natural events. Okay, let me review the key themes here that we spoke of last week. Okay, first, ultimately we are talking about standards. That word has several meanings in English. I'm going to remind you of the use of standard on page 29. Let's go to page 29 at the, even further back. Andreski is talking about, further back, it was in Andreski's first quote on page 25, Andreski was talking about social scientists who are just pulling ideas from the air and not supporting them with any actual facts. And he said, there will be no standards whatsoever if someone doesn't preach for them and preach against vice. And by vice, he meant the vice of falsifying scientific documentation and neglecting to prove your steps scientifically. So we need standards. In other words, something is not established as a fact unless it has proof to undergird it and support it. This is kind of what Andreski meant by standards. Now, earlier he was saying that Bertrand Russell was his philosophic base, and Bertrand Russell doesn't really believe in standards. He believes in that which can be measured and that which can be touched and that which has scientifically verifiable existence in the material world. And a standard is an intellectual construct. It is an intellectual category. It exists in the mind. So, Levis pointed out that Andreski, on the one hand, was confirming Bertrand Russell's Cartesian dualism. But on the other, he was saying, but we must have standards. So he was revealing an inconsistency in his thought. So then Levis went on to say, it seems that Andreski does not know what the word standards means. He hasn't thought clearly about what it means. Then we went into, that was the quote on 29 that I originally sent you to, and I will read it. This is on page 29 in the first full paragraph, which begins, "This avowal seems to me a highly valuable testimony." What avowal? The avowal that it is hard to envision any standards whatsoever without some people taking it upon themselves to affirm them and preach against vice. So, that is valuable, although Andreski doesn't realize the full value. And then at the end of that paragraph, it says, but the intention itself, meaning Andreski's intention, the intention itself could have no better than a very partial clarity without a better understanding of the nature of standards than we can credit Andreski with. So, and then it says, the issues are fundamental and in relation to the status of English as a discipline of thought, they are of the utmost importance. So, generally speaking, right now, I am going to review what we spoke of last week about standards. Now, remember, the Cartesian dualism says that there is a mathematical universe that the scientists and the experts have defined. That is the real universe. That which we, the layman, the amateur, the ordinary guy on the street, perceive, that which we perceive is only an illusion. Our brain creates order where order does not exist. The actual universe is a result of random forces chaotically colliding to produce results which do not have intelligent design. Our brain imposes order upon them. That is what the dualism says. Now, Marjorie Green attacks that view. She says she is defending the reality of intelligible designs or intelligible form, which we almost can equate with standards. According to the scientists, there is no such thing actually. There is no actual reality to an intelligible form. There is no blueprint in heaven of a cat. There is no Platonic ideal. The Platonic ideal does not exist. It is only something which the mind has generated as a model, but it does not have actual existence. They would say that the mechanism, the way we perceive a cat, is simply by memory. When we were very young, we saw a cat, and our mother named it cat. And we remember. She named a tree, tree. She named the sky, sky. She named the dog, dog. Everything is a random bit of information without order and category. And we remember those pieces individually. That would be the idea. Okay. Marjorie Green is attacking that. And last week I told you that I have a degree in linguistics, and I have studied the way the brain processes language. And I believe that what Marjorie Green is saying is scientifically validated for us now. So let us review what Marjorie Green is saying. Marjorie Green is saying that Russell is trying to build a purely factual language, which means a language that recognizes only objects which can be recognized by their measurements. Okay? But Marjorie Green says no names such as red or feline or colored can work under this system of purely factual words, because red and cat are instances of a universal. Now, what is that universal? What is red? Now, I've brought a picture of the color spectrum. Here is something I recognize as a red pen. But which red is it? Is it the red that is close to yellow? Is it the red that is further? And it would have been possible, if I could have found it on the internet, to get a red spectrum where you have the dark reds, the medium reds, the lighter reds straight across, where it's only red. So I look at this pen and I tell you it's a red pen. And you think, well, are you thinking this bright red? Or are you thinking, no, I would say no, it's darker than that. It's more of a maroon. It's a darker red. Well, each of us has in our mind a concept, red. And when we see an instance, this or this, we compare it to the concept. So every instance of red is an instance of a universal which exists in my mind, but it also exists in your mind and in everyone's mind who has vision, who isn't colorblind. Also, with cat, the Humean empiricist would say, I look at a cat, Alessandro's cat, and I remember another cat that my mother told me that's a cat. And I say, oh, it's a cat because I remember. I want to show you a picture. I don't know how well you can see. There are two animals here. Can they see this, do you think? Both have light orange fur with white around their eyes and ears. Both have whiskers. Both have black eyes, rather large. Both have pointy ears coming out of their heads. They appear to weigh the same. They have the same kind of fur. They both have similar, almost identical noses. These two animals look almost exactly alike. Can you see them well enough to know what they are? This one is a rabbit, and this one is a cat. Take a look at this picture. In this picture, you have a rabbit, and you have a cat, and you have a hamster, it looks like, and you have a dog. If I was remembering, when I was a child, my mother showed me this animal, and said rabbit. Which animal does it look the most like? It looks the most like the dog. If I were looking at this, I would say this animal was more like that one than I would say it was like this one. But I know in my mind that there is something called rabbit, and it looks like this. Now, neither of those pictures look like that. My concept rabbit is an adult hare. It's a hare. It's got high ears. It's got a cottontail. Yet, I know this is a rabbit, and I know this is a rabbit. And I know that's a dog, even though it looks incredibly similar to the cat in this picture. If you look at the ears and the eyes, somehow I can just tell that thing is a dog. Intelligible form exists. Now the question also, Marjorie Green talks of language. She says that C-A-T, at, are sounds. And when we put them together, cat, it is an instance of a universal. Now, linguistically speaking, that is true. When you are a baby, your mother corrects your babble, your utterances, to kind of corral them into what we call phonemes. Phonemes are meaningful sounds. Every language has phonemes, and they are different for every language, so they are arbitrary in that sense. However, every language has them. They are necessary. They are necessary because the universe we exist in has categories. And we must have a system of symbols to correspond to the actual categories in the world. So, any sound that comes close to k, the mother corrects until it is dead on k. Any sound that comes close to ah, so they might say ah, anything that's close, the mother corrects it until it becomes ah. Any sound close to t, it could be t, it could be t, it could be t. Anything close to t, the mother corrects until the child gets it right, and it becomes a phoneme, a meaningful sound. And when you put these meaningful sounds together, they conjure a category that's in the real world, like cat. And any person who says this, they could say it in a funny accent, like a southerner in America might say, a cat, a cat. They do a lot of movement on the vowels. Or a British person might say a cut. They'll say it differently, but we learn to put it in to our intelligible form verbally so that it will correspond to actual categories in the world. Now, the Humean would say you are just remembering all this, but it is not true that we are remembering all this. It's actually a system that our brain uses to code our thought. And it corresponds directly with categories which are in the universe that we recognize. And the standard cat is a concept cat. It's an ideal. It's my large rabbit that I have in my mind. And anytime I see an animal that I recognize, somehow I recognize it to go into that category, even if it looks more like a dog right now. Somehow I recognize it. And then to summarize in the end, she says, we live in a coherent universe, structured through language. A coherent universe. That means you and I can perceive reliably what the universe is. We do not need to rely on an expert scientist to tell us what the universe is in terms of atoms or in terms of invisible realities. We do not need a philosopher to tell us that our concept of reality is false. The concept of reality is not false. The table really does exist. And when I feel it, I am experiencing reality. Okay. The tendency of the Cartesian duality is to separate man from reliance on his original perceptions. And we need to get back to trusting in our common sense perception that it is representative of reality as it is. Okay, so we will move on to the paragraph beginning with Marjorie Green makes it plain. Okay, so we're going to move on. Marjorie Green makes it plain in respect of the word standard that to use it as one does in literary criticism is natural and proper, and consistent with the use she makes of it in dealing with Russell. She gives an account of the nature of standards and of the way in which, in the act of judging, they enter in, and we see demonstrated in the chapter that there is a continuity from the kind of judgment in terms of which she answers Russell to the literary judgments, the nature of which I offered to explain to a critic of a book of mine a good many years ago. "Allow me," he had said, "to sketch your ideal of poetry, your norm with which you measure every poet." My concern was to bring home to him that there was no real reading of a poem that didn't involve a complex process of evaluative response that was truly personal. And I replied, the critic, the reader of poetry, is indeed concerned with evaluation, but to figure him as measuring with a norm that he brings up from the outside is to misrepresent the process. That, of course, was only a start. Marjorie Green, having insisted that value judgment enters into statements of fact from the beginning, writes, and then we'll stop there and talk about this paragraph. Start at the beginning. Marjorie Green makes it plain in respect of the word standard that to use it as one does in literary criticism is natural and proper, and consistent with the use she makes of it in dealing with Russell. Okay, standard. For Marjorie Green, a standard is an intelligible form. It is a category of things, a class of things with characteristics that is embedded in your worldview and in your psyche. It is not consciously remembered like a group of something you memorized, like math facts, multiplication table. It is not like that. It is something that you have basically perceived. That is a standard. So you have your standard tree, your standard bush, your standard shrub, your standard grass, your standard moss, each one getting smaller and smaller. Okay. So, in literary criticism, we use the word standard. Well, we can use it in several ways, but there should be standards for poetry, standards for good fiction, standards for drama. So you can discuss that which is good or bad in a genre, or that which is in a certain tradition, based on the standards of that tradition. Okay. So Marjorie Green makes it plain, in respect of the word standard, that to use it, as one does in literary criticism, is natural and proper, and consistent with the use she makes of it in dealing with Russell. Okay, so she uses the word the same way all the time. She gives an account of the nature of standards and of the way in which, in the act of judging, they enter in. I'm going to stop there. Let us talk about the act of judging. In our home school, we have studied logic. And at the very foundation level of logic, you have a concept and you judge, well, you have two concepts. So you might have man is mortal. And you have to make a judgment in order to recognize that man is mortal. To connect these things is to make a judgment. Man is not immortal. Immortal. Okay, so we make a judgment. When we decide that this is red and not orange, we are making a judgment. Judgment is part of recognizing something to be a member of a class or to be not a member of that class. This is red, this is not red. I have made a judgment. I believe he is using the word judgment in this sense. Marjorie Green gives an account of the nature of standards. Standards are concepts. And of the way in which, in the act of judging, they enter in. We must have standards. We have cat, we have dog, we have rabbit. And in the act of judging, we must have these standards in order to put animals into their right categories. So I have these standards, and then I see an animal, and I judge. Is it a cat, or a rabbit, or a dog? So standards enter in, judgment enters in. We must have standards in order to recognize and categorize objects that we perceive, objects that we experience. So Marjorie Green gives an account of the nature of standards and of the way in which, in the act of judging, they enter in. And we see demonstrated in the chapter that there is a continuity from the kind of judgment in terms of which she answers Russell to the literary judgments, the nature of which I offered to explain to a critic of a book of mine many years ago. Okay, so he is now making a bridge from Marjorie Green's defense of standards and explanation of standards to a conversation Levis had with a critic of his, someone who was critical of his work in the negative sense. This person, in a very superior way, said, "Allow me to sketch your ideal of poetry, your norm with which you measure every poet." That is a condescending thing to say to an expert literary critic like Levis. He is suggesting that Levis is narrow and shallow, and that he has one idea of his favorite kind of poem, and he is incapable of recognizing value in anything else unless it conforms to his narrow ideal. That is what he is suggesting in this sentence. Allow me to sketch your ideal of poetry, your norm, with which you measure every poet. It's possible that this person, this critic, doesn't approve of having standards at all. He may think everything goes. He may think that you should not criticize poetry, that poetry is an individual's self-expression and not subject to criticism by any standard whatsoever. There are many people who think that. Okay. My concern was to bring home to him, you understand, bring home to him? That means to explain to him and to convince him, to help him get the idea. That's what bring home to him. If I say, that brought home to me the idea that Olavo's right, that means it convinced me for the first time and I felt it was true. Brought home to. My concern was to bring home to him that there was no real reading of a poem that didn't involve a complex process of evaluative response. Okay, there was no real reading. It doesn't just mean you can't physically read it. It means there is no reading, interacting with, experiencing, and engaging with a poem. So there is no real reading of a poem. No real reading means truly engaging. No real reading of a poem that didn't involve a complex process of evaluative response. Okay, now, remember when I talked about the phonemes and the CAT? It's a complex process linguistically by which our brains nudge sounds we hear into phonemic categories. And also, it's a complex process by which we recognize an animal and say, oh, that's a rabbit, even though it looks just like that cat. There's somehow, by some complex process, I can recognize that that's a dog, and that's a rabbit, and that's a cat, even though they all look so much alike. It's a complex process. In the same way, when we're reading a poem, a complex process is going on that we're not aware of, but we are responding to it on many levels, unconsciously. We're responding to the rhythm, the meter, the rhyme, the imagery, the content, subject matter. We are responding even to the way the type looks, or the archaic language or modern language, the punctuation. All these things are having effect. It's a very complex response. And this is a process. It's happening. So my concern was to bring home to him that there was no real reading of a poem that didn't involve a complex process of evaluative response. Evaluative does mean I'm comparing it to a standard and saying, is this good or bad? If they make a mistake with rhythm, we say, oh, I didn't like that. Or if there's a beautiful cadence, we say, wow, that's grand. Okay, so we are evaluating as we respond. We're not just observing and describing. We are saying this is either good or bad to us, in addition to experiencing it. So there is a complex process of evaluative response that was truly personal. And, I replied, the critic, the reader of poetry, is indeed concerned with evaluation, as I just said. But to figure him as measuring with a norm that he brings up from the outside is to misrepresent the process. Okay, so the phrase, that was personal. I didn't say anything about that except to emphasize it. In this argument, the scientists, those who are holding the dualism, they don't like things which are personal, because to them personal means arbitrary, and arbitrary means non-measurable, and non-measurable means it doesn't have any valid existence at all. It's like, well, that's your personal response, but my personal response is the opposite, and yours has no bearing in reality. And maybe a generous dualist would say, and neither does mine, although usually they think theirs does. But anyway, it is personal in the sense that it is a person who is having all these responses. The person is using the complex operating system of his brain and soul, which has been constructed over a lifetime. It's almost like a machine we have in our heads that consists of our ordered system of words and sounds and letters and phonemes, all of which correspond, when they are combined, to categories in the real world. So this is our interface with reality. And based on, and not only that, it's our experience of human experience through literature. So we have all that to bring to the table. So it is personal, profoundly. But that does not mean it is not real. Just because a person is using his personal apparatus to interact with reality does not mean they aren't interacting with reality. Okay, so it's truly personal. And I replied to this guy, the critic, the reader of poetry, is indeed concerned with evaluation. Apparently the guy didn't like evaluation, as I said before. He thought, we have no right to evaluate and to say this poet is good and this one's bad, according to our own preferences and standards. So, the critic, the reader of the poetry, is indeed concerned with evaluation. The use of indeed there is what clued me in to the fact that the original critic didn't like evaluation and that Levis was making a concession. The guy says, I don't like evaluation. And Levis says, yes, indeed, we are evaluating. So indeed is what told me, yes, in fact, we are doing this thing which you don't like. So it is indeed concerned with evaluation. But, so we make our concession, then we pull back with something different, something in a different spirit. Indeed, we are doing this bad thing. But we are not really doing a bad thing. But to figure him as measuring with a norm that he brings up from the outside is to misrepresent the process. When the Humean empiricist says, I know this is a cat because I have memorized what cats are, he is misrepresenting the process. And when the critic says Levis is holding every poem to one standard that is his personal favorite, he is misrepresenting the process. The process is infinitely more complex and deep than that, and broad as well. Okay. He is misrepresenting the process. Parentheses. That, of course, was only a start. I wonder if he means that was only a start to his response to the guy. Or maybe it means that is only a start to what he could say about it to us, his reader. I'm not sure. Marjorie Green, having insisted that value judgment enters into statements of fact from the beginning. Now, where did she insist that? Well, she insisted it when she said color words imply a value judgment. Is it a dark red or a light red? If I say this is a red pen, the immediate, instantaneous perception is that it is a light red, or it's kind of a rich dark red, sort of almost blood red. So that's a value judgment, the value of the color. Value judgments are part of the judgment process to decide whether it's a cat or a dog. It's a judgment, a value judgment. Value judgment does not only mean is it moral or immoral. It also can mean is it a dog or a cat? That's what Marjorie Green is arguing for. The intelligible form and the ability to abstract from your perceptions which category a thing belongs to. Okay, let us look at her quote now. We'll read ahead. To say, this here red, I must already have abstracted from my immediate relational perceptions, stood back from them and assessed them, so as to be able to place a new occurrent into the class of like though differing particulars into which it fits. Only then I can tag it as red. Not that I have in my memory a series of particular color images such as Hume suggested. What I have is the power of bringing each new particular to the bar of judgment according to a principle, a standard by which I judge it, That standard is neither verbally formulable nor present as a visual image, or even a series of visual images. Remember when I said I could have come up with a spectrum of reds? Even if I had a spectrum of reds, each in a different square, so that we could compare every possible red, it would not correspond to your concept red. That concept cannot be verbally formulated. In other words, I cannot describe it. It's intrinsically not formulable. And it is not present as a visual image. Any visual image I pull up will not be the precise reality of your concept red. Any image I pull up will automatically fit itself into lighter, darker, bluer, oranger. Okay. Your concept does not exist as a visual image, neither does it exist as something that could be explained verbally. So let's look at the beginning of this quote. I started at the end just because it was right there for me. To say, this here red. I want to give you a little English trivia here. In the South, people who are uneducated will say, this here eraser, or this here pen, or this here lamp now, it's turned on, or this here board, it falls over quite a lot, or this here microphone is newfangled. It don't look like any microphone I've ever seen, or this here book. I can't understand this here book. This here book. Okay, so when I read Marjorie Green's This Here Red, I automatically put it in a southern accent and said, this here red. But I'm sure that wasn't right. Marjorie Green is a well-educated Brit. She's from England, and 1950, and she's an intellectual. So what she means is the literal. She means this red which I have here. This here red. But I'm being an American and a Southerner. I immediately heard it according to my percept of ignorant speech. Basically, it's not ignorant, it's regional. So, but it's not standard English. So you can't use it and have anyone think you're well educated. So hillbillies say that. So anyway, to say this here red, this instance of red, I must already have abstracted from my immediate relational perceptions. Okay, abstraction is also one of those words I learned in logic, where you look at something and you abstract from what you see, you abstract a concept, the concept pencil. Actually, this looks much more like a pen because it's got this little thingy and this little thingy. And if you didn't look real closely, you would think this was a pen. But in fact, I have abstracted that this is actually a pencil because I happen to know it's got graphite. So when you abstract, what you do is you take your visual image and you connect it to the appropriate intelligible form, the appropriate category of thing. That process is called abstraction. So I have a visual image on my retina, and that goes to my brain, and then it connects by the process of abstraction with the category flower. Or, depending on my context, it could be weed. Because maybe I'm trying to grow a lawn. Or it could be medicinal herb. I have categories, and they correspond to actual categories in the world. And I place this image into the appropriate category by the process of abstraction. Okay, so when I say this red, which I have here, I can't say this here red with a straight face. This red, which I have here, I have already abstracted the fact that it's red of a certain specific hue, and that it belongs in the category of red, which I'm comparing it to. To say this here red, I must already have abstracted from my immediate relational perceptions and stood back from them and assessed them so as to be able to place the new occurrent, because she said every instance is an occurrence of the universal, an instance of the universal. So I've got this occurrent, and I must place it. And by the time I say it's a red, I have already placed it. I have already stood back and discovered that it's part of the red end of the spectrum. So I have abstracted into the class of like though differing particulars. Actually, this red doesn't fit anywhere on this spectrum. If you could see more closely, you would see that there is no red which matches this. Actually, it sort of matches right here. It actually matches perhaps most closely here. Indigo. But I actually know it's a red. So no matter even if it looks more like indigo, it's red. Just like if someone says caught, I don't care what they said, I know they mean this thing because of context. So my brain puts it in the right category no matter what we hear, no matter what we see. We recognize it as an intelligible form by the process of abstraction. And we know it is like though different. Only then can I tag it as red. Not that I have in my memory a series of particular color images, such as Hume suggested. Now I want to tell you something. I have a terrible memory for colors. Horrible. My daughter is an artist, and she has a great memory for colors. And I remember once she and I rode our bicycles to the Salvation Army. That is a thrift store for used goods, where you can buy something cheap that someone else threw away. It's like a junk shop. And in that store, I saw a basket that I said would match my bike. And my daughter said, "What? How could it match your bike?" And I said, "See, it's the same color. It's gray or whatever." And she said, "Your bike is blue." And I said, "No, it's not. I was sure. I remembered clearly that my bike was exactly the same color as the gray basket I had in front of me. I was positive." And she said, "Let's look." So we went outside, and I saw that my bike was actually about this color of blue. It wasn't gray at all. My memory totally failed me. So if I was saying this color is blue because I remember my bike, Or this basket, I would have said the basket is blue, remembering my bike. But in fact, I said, no, the basket is gray, and I recolored my memory of my bike. That may not be clear to you, but it's clear to me that the category gray is stronger than my memory of an instance of it on my bike. I don't remember instances, but I definitely have a concept gray, and a concept blue, and a concept red, and a concept purple, indigo. And this ain't it, no matter what it appears to match. So, not that I have in my memory a series of particular color images, such as Hume suggested. What I have is the power of bringing each new particular to the bar of judgment. According to a principle, a standard, by which I judge it. I judge. This is red. This is green. This is blue. I don't even have to find it on the spectrum. I recognize it instantly. Just like I recognize that this is a cat and this is a rabbit. I don't need to think. I recognize it instantly because that's the way our brain is programmed to correspond to reality, because our brain is our interface between reality, which is ordered and intelligible and coherent, and our soul, which wants to interface with reality. So our brain is the interface, and it's set up the same way. Okay, so I bring everything to the bar of judgment according to a principle, a standard, by which I judge it. That standard is neither verbally formulable nor present as a visual image or a series of visual images. So how do I know a cat is a cat? Well, if I said a cat, I'd say, well, it has fur, it has eyes, it has pointy ears, it has whiskers. And then you take a look and you say, that must be it. It's not verbally formulable. That's clearly a cat and that one isn't. I could say it has the DNA of a rabbit, or whatever, but you can't get to that. It's not verbally formulable, but it exists. Just like cats exist, even though we can't say why or what they are. Okay. Next paragraph. We're good on time? Yes? One has the power because, in that way which defies clear and logical statement, defies deliberate thought, unless in a creative writer's use of language, one belongs to a community. The standard, though personal, apprehended personally, as in and of the nature of the real, and applied personally, but not as a matter of decision, is not merely personal. It is a product of immemorially collaborative creativity. The kind of value judgment immediately in question in the paragraph from the knower and the known, which I have just quoted, is at the mathematical logician's end of the spectrum. The end tactically selected as representative by Russell for his Cartesian purpose. The discipline that maintains the standards of science has its existence in a specializing community, the intellectual devotion of which is a special and professional morality. But Andreski would do well to ponder this. I quote again from Marjorie Green. It seems to me an unquestionable truth, and I'll go ahead and read the quote. No discipline, however factual, however detached, can come into being or remain in existence, except insofar as the fundamental evaluative acts of the individuals belonging to a given culture have legislated into existence and maintain in existence the area of free inquiry and of mutual confirmation or falsification which such inquiry demands. Okay. One has the power, in that way which defies clear and logical statement, defies deliberate thought, unless in a creative writer's use of language, one belongs to a community. Okay, core sentence. Why don't you try to figure it out while I erase the board? What is the core sentence? Send it to me on email if you're out there, or on chat. What's the core sentence? I'll give you time. I'm writing the whole thing. You're supposed to get the core sentence. In that way which defies clear. Defies deliberate thought unless in the creative. Unless in a creative writer's use of language. One belongs to a community. Okay. Has anyone come up with what the core sentence is? Alessandro, has anyone chatted?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you think the core sentence is?
One student says, one has the power because one belongs to a community.
That is correct. One has the power because one belongs to a community. Now, how did you know that? The short answer to how you know that is, well, these things, these dashes definitely set off something which is not part of the core. And aside from that, the comma also. So, one has the power because one belongs to a community. So the question I now have is, what power? The power to do what? Well, we have to look back up to the quote above. To say this here read, I must have already abstracted from my immediate relational perception, stood back and assessed, so as to be able to place the new occurrent in the class of like though differing particulars into which it fits. Only then can I tag it as read. Blah, blah, blah. Okay? Well, I'll keep reading. Only then can I tag it as red. Not that I have in my memory a series of particular color images, such as Hume suggested. What I have is the power of bringing each new particular to the bar of judgment, according to a principle, a standard by which I judge it. The standard is neither verbally formulable nor present as a visual image or a series. So, the power of bringing each new particular object to the bar of judgment, according to a principle or standard by which I judge it. Okay, so one has the power to differentiate between red and green, to differentiate between a cat and a dog and a rabbit and a hamster, to differentiate between an eraser and a pen, a pencil and a pen. I have the power to differentiate because I belong to a community. In my school, they taught me to understand that something with graphite is a pencil, no matter what extra stuff it's got, and that something with ink is a pen. The community decided that. You could easily imagine a community that just said, get me a pen, and it wouldn't matter what you brought. The community arbitrarily decided. The community decides what is these things. They are arbitrary, and just like the English language has decided that k, a, t are all phonemes, put them together to get cat, Spanish would say, they don't have the same vowels, and they don't have the same consonants. They pronounce things differently. So, perro is a dog. If you're in the Spanish community, perro conjures dog. If you're in the English community, dog conjures dog. So, it's being in a community where there is agreement about what is what that enables you to bring something to the bar of judgment and differentiate this into that category, that into that category. Okay? One, meaning any person, has the power to do this because one belongs to a community. Now, let's see what else he has to say. Has the power because, in that way, which defies clear and logical statement. Remember how much trouble I had telling you what red looked like? Or what a cat was? In a way that differentiated it from a bunny? Okay, it defies clear and logical statement. That means you can't do it. Defies in this context means it is impossible to put it forth in clear and logical statement. It is impossible to put it forth with deliberate thought. So if I tried to think, what is a cat? I started stumbling. Well, it has fur. It's an animal. It has pointy ears and whiskers, and that still describes a rabbit or anything else. So deliberate thought, well, maybe we could use DNA. Deliberate thought, it kind of defies, the categorization defies deliberate thought, unless it be by a creative writer's use of language. Now, he doesn't use creative. When I think of creative writing, that's a subject we study in school. It means writing poetry or writing a story, fiction. That's creative writing. I don't believe he's using creative that way. He's using creative in the whole theme of the book is the creativity of all mankind flowing into one continuous river of creative output of the human race, that we are part of a continuity of creativity through literature, through reading and language. So I think he's talking creative as someone who's doing original thinking, someone who's thinking creatively. So I an ordinary person say, what is a cat? Well, it's furry, it says meow, and then the creative thinker would say, okay, and then they would give a comprehensive explanation of the cat. Remember I talked about the Porphyrian tree. That was an attempt at a comprehensive explanation of what a certain concept is. So, one has the power, because this power to differentiate in the way which defies clear and logical statement and defies deliberate thought, unless in a creative writer's use of language. So it's a complex process. One belongs to a community. Going on. The standard, though personal, apprehended personally as in and of the nature of the real, and applied personally, but not as a matter of decision, is not merely personal. It is a product of immemorially collaborative creativity. That sentence is pretty clear to me. The standard, what is red? What is a cat? What is a pen? What is a pencil? Though personal, I apprehend it personally. I see the image personally. I run it through my own machinery, my own categories, personally, as in the nature of the real. It's apprehended personally, but it is real. It's in the nature of the real. I apprehend it from the nature of the real. And applied personally. I'm the one applying it to my categories, but not as a matter of decision. I didn't decide that this was red. This simply is red, even though it looks kind of like indigo. It's not a matter of decision. I recognize this thing as red instantaneously. I didn't decide it, but I did personally see the sight and apply it to my own standard and come out with the judgment. It's red. Not as a matter of decision. So it is not merely personal. Merely meaning only personal and nothing else. The people who are critical of personal, of subjective, of values, they would say it's just personal, meaning it has no independent existence. No, it is not merely personal, lacking independent existence. No. The existence of the standard is outside of me. I did not originate this standard. It is a product of immemorially collaborative creativity. Immemorially says to me from early times until now, from the beginning until the end, throughout history. Immemorially collaborative. That means everyone working together. Cooperation. Agreement. From the beginning of time, we had people interacting and agreeing and perceiving together on these standards, these categories, these intelligible forms. Creativity. This just suggests in my memory a story. The story of Adam naming the animals. So Adam looks at an elephant and says, that's an elephant. He looks at a dog and says, it couldn't be anything but a dog. He looks at a flamingo and says, wow, flamingo. And he looks at a woman and goes, whoa, woman. Now he is naming creatively. The human race has named the animals. We have named the trees. We have named the stars. We didn't create them, but we acknowledged their independent existence by giving them a name in our system. Our system corresponds to reality. We acknowledge what is through our language. I would like to digress for a moment and talk about intelligent design. Intelligent design. In the United States, the battle rages over creation and evolution. When my daughter went to college, she went to a very good state-sponsored college in Virginia. She came home and said, "You know, Mom, it's amazing. They get evolution out of everything. They teach evolution in every class." Evolution has become so intrinsic to our worldview that there is no subject that is not taught from an evolutionary perspective. Now, in the Christian school system for children and colleges, we have creationism or creation science. And the creationists deny Darwinian evolution completely. Darwinian evolution, they deny it completely. And they look for evidence of a creator, that God created, like it says in the Bible. Now, into this battle came a new movement. The new movement was called intelligent design. There were scientists who could not sign on to Darwinian evolution because there were scientific flaws in the presentation of the material. So they said, it is clear that this is wrong. However, we are atheists and we cannot go for this. So they produced a body of scientific literature acknowledging the intelligent design behind the universe, which Darwinian evolution cannot account for. The strict evolutionists have to go with the idea that the world is the product of random chance. And the intelligent design people acknowledged the fact that there is order in our universe and that we live in a coherent universe. But they made no statement as to the source of the order, what they called the information, which is evidenced by the order in what we can observe. Now, many people say intelligent design is a smokescreen. Remember that word from the beginning of class? A smokescreen. for creation. They say nobody really believes in intelligent design. They're just trying to get through creation in a way that will not be considered religious. But I personally believe that that intelligent design is scientifically verifiable, and that it is, I don't want to use the word stupid, because that's a stupid word to use in a way. It is, a good word would be disingenuous. Disingenuous. To pretend that order does not exist. But the philosophies behind this mandate and require that you believe that the order does not exist, because they have no explanation for the order other than natural selection. And intelligent design simply acknowledges it. He doesn't speculate as to the source. So I was going to say that with language, yes, we apprehend personally an image onto our retina. We abstract that it is a star. We recognize it as Betelgeuse, or we recognize it as our sun. And we judge, this is it, and we name it. But that doesn't make it personal in the sense of arbitrary or non-existing. It simply makes it an acknowledgement, a nod to a reality which has been recognized by every man since Adam. And so I think that's what they're getting at. And I'm thinking now's the time to take a break, and we'll pick up with the second half of the paragraph next week. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them now. Come back in 5 minutes just to say goodbye, unless you have questions. Okay, we're back. We have a couple of questions and a poem to share with you by T.S. Eliot. But first I'll answer the questions. We have a game called Blind Man's Bluff, which someone has asked how you play. This is a game we play a lot in parties. You have a lot of young people, maybe at least 4 or 5, and up to many more, young adults or children. And you take one person and you put a blindfold on his eyes so he can't see, and then he tries to touch people. And everybody dances close to him and says, "Here I am," and he tries to touch, and then they run away. And if the blind person manages to touch you, then you get to be blind next. So it's a game, it's like tag with one person blinded. It's called Blind Man's Bluff. It's a very popular game for parties. Question: is there more than one pronunciation for this word? Yes. This could be pronounced neither or neither. In my dialect, I pronounce it neither. Neither blue nor brown is my favorite color. But you could say neither. Neither blue nor brown is my favorite color. Neither, neither. Question: if I was a bird, I could fly. If I were a bird, I could fly. Which is correct? Alessandro seemed to think that one was better than the other, but either one works. In speech, I would be more likely to say was. Were, to me, sounds a little more formal. But aside from that, they both seem correct to me. I don't know. And the final is a poem, which is called The Naming of Cats by T.S. Eliot, and I'll read it to you by way of farewell. I've never read it before, so I may not read it very well. I'm not real good with poetry. The Naming of Cats by T.S. Eliot. The naming of cats is a difficult matter. It isn't just one of your holiday games. You may think at first I'm as mad as a hatter when I tell you a cat must have 3 different names. First of all, there's the name that the family uses daily, such as Peter, Augustus, Alonzo, or James, such as Victor, Jonathan, George, or Bill Bailey, all of them sensible, everyday names. There are fancier names if you think they sound sweeter, some for the gentlemen, some for the dames, such as Plato, Admetus, Electra, Demeter, but all of them sensible, everyday names. But I tell you, a cat needs a name that's particular, a name that's peculiar and more dignified, else how can he keep up his tail perpendicular, or spread out his whiskers, or cherish his pride? Of names of this kind I can give you a quorum, such as Munkustrap, Quaxo, or Coricopat, such as Bombalurina, or else Jellylorum, names that never belong to more than one cat. But above and beyond, there's still one name left over, and that is the name you never will guess. The name that no human research can discover, but the cat himself knows, and will never confess. When you notice a cat in profound meditation, the reason I tell you is always the same. His mind is engaged in a rapt contemplation of the thought of the thought of the thought of his name. His ineffable, effable, and ineffable, deep and inscrutable, singular name. That's it. T.S. Eliot. You gotta like it. If you have any more comments, send them in. We'll talk next week. It's been a pleasure, as usual. See you next Thursday.